All right, so I'm going to, and I apologize, I had to miss the first maybe 10 minutes of Amy's presentation, so I'm not sure if she provided all of the same information. I knew she was going to touch on the hold harmless and the new run, so I have a little bit of information here. These are just all the runs that you may see on your summary of finance and sort of what was done during that time. So Amy mentioned, for example, the 33209 run, and that's your actual PEMS ADA. As David mentioned, that'll be what your state spending requirement is based on. So that'll be an important run to go and review. And then depending on if you're a charter or what kind of district you are, and if you recapture district, you may see some of these ranges here will apply to only certain districts, but essentially all of these ranges, at least the way I'm understanding it, is those are various iterations of settling on your better of capped PEMS ADA or hold harmless ADA, for example. So any of those from 33254 to 33349, those are all going to be that's sort of the number that those runs are settling on. Okay, and so this kind of help you kind of decode again what's going on your summary of finance, and so that way you can kind of track some of those pieces that Amy touched on. And then I know I did see her mention these two new spreadsheets. Actually, if Amy, if you're still on, it looks like, at least when I grabbed this screenshot, the link to the hold harmless ADA is down. She may have addressed that.
It's actually fixed now.
Oh, it is fixed. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great.
We had a typo in that spreadsheet.
Right.
For pointing it out. We needed to fix it, so we took it down and now it's back.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I think I got muted accidentally. Okay.
I did that. Sorry.
No. Okay, I think I'm good now. Okay, let's see. So yeah, I'm not going to go over those spreadsheets in detail, but if you guys have any questions on what Amy went over, that's going to really be the breadcrumbs for y'all to see how you get from your actual ADA to your capped ADA to your hold harmless ADA, and then what ultimately drives your funding. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Amy, and we're happy to walk you through that. And so just kind of an overview of how this works. So again, in this example, this district, their funding under their hold harmless ADA is higher than their funding with their capped actual ADA, right? The actual ADA that's capped for the remote, that's subject to the remote cap. And so they would be, what we would call a hold harmless district. And I just want to reiterate that that difference isn't really new funding, new state aid. All that really means for y'all is you get to now use your ESSER2 allocation to pay for that difference. So instead of ESSER2 flowing as 100% supplemental to your district, now if you're trying to bring your budget up to that hold harmless number, you will have to rely on a portion of your ESSER2 allocation. So in this alternative example with this district, and I think the example Amy gave earlier was La Jolla. Their funding under their actual ADA was higher than their funding under the hold harmless ADA. And so this district would not see any supplanting of state aid with ESSER2 allocation. All of ESSER2 would be supplemental. And so as David mentioned, I guess that would have implications on when you can recognize ESSER2 in 21. So just be mindful of that. Looking at this from a big picture, according to the file that TA put out and sort of our analysis of the runs, it seems about 62% of districts saw a benefit under the hold harmless. And and by that, I mean, their hold harmless funding was higher than their actual capped ADA funding. And so they will be required to use a portion of their ESSER II allocation, or essentially, yeah, their ESSER II allocation will be needed if they want to maintain their budget at the hold harmless level, I think is a better way to phrase that. And so that will apply to about 62% of districts. The other 38% of districts, they got better funding under their actual ADA. And so all of their ESSER II allocation will be supplemental revenue. And so of the $5 billion that was given to districts here in Texas for ESSER II, when you add all that up, it comes out to about $1.1 billion. Of that allocation is going to be needed to help districts get back up to that hold harmless funding level. So it's going to be sort of the state using it to supplant that state aid. And so that's a big chunk of that. And so that's what we're seeing from a statewide level on that. The other thing I want to mention is the legislative payment estimate ADA. So if you add up all the LPEs, at least of the latest run that I looked at, the state had been appropriated funding to pay for 5.15 million ADA. And then I just have that compared to sort of those other scenarios that Amy talked about earlier. Actual ADA, on that actual ADA run statewide, that was about 4.97 million. When you add up all the hold harmless ADA, that's about 5.11 million. And then of course, I think that's run 33254 is that sort of greater of assessment. And so that is 5.14 million. And so I think that the takeaway here is the LPE estimate would, again, these are students and not dollars, but it was very comparable to where we kind of ended with the hold harmless fully implemented. So that's that greater of run. And so, I think that can raise some questions on if the state needed to rely on ESSER II to pay for the hold harmless, given what was already appropriated. And so I think that's something that, as we're thinking about future hold harmlesses or really how the state spends, they have another round of stimulus dollars that they're debating on how to spend now. I think that can be an important point to raise, as we have discussions on future aid that's passed down to school districts. We touched on this a little bit already. The reason why TEA can't do the hold harmless the same way it was done last year and similar, I guess, the year before that, was because of a provision that was added to House Bill 1525 by Senator Taylor. It sort of prevents the ADA adjustment in the same way that it's been done so far in the pandemic. And so as we touched on, they're looking at the low attendance waivers. That's not going to help you with low enrollment. I know that's something a lot of y'all are worried about or experiencing. That's really just going to if you have low attendance, that'll help sort of remove that day from the calculation. But I know many districts saw low enrollment, particularly in those younger grades, and I haven't seen any data yet on how much there'll be, how much we'll see districts bounce back from that, if that was just a temporary thing or if that's more of a sort of long-term trends, if that's going to be the start of a more long-term trend in enrollment. And so that's something, if you're seeing low enrollment in your district, just know that any discussion on the hold harmless, I don't think currently is going to address that problem. And as I mentioned earlier, the state does have resources to potentially provide some aid for districts that are in this position. They have about $17 billion. You guys got your ESSER 1, 2, and 3. They got a separate pot of money. The state did under the American Rescue Plan. It's the State and Local Recovery Fund or something like that. And it totals almost $17 billion. And the state kind of has a pretty wide latitude on what they can use that for. And that's something that's on the call for this special session that started on the 20th. And so those conversations are happening now. So to the extent you guys want to get involved and reach out to your elected officials, I think now would be a great time to make sure that they're aware of that and also aware of your needs moving forward, particularly if you guys are seeing low enrollment and or low attendance. All right. The next thing I'm going to touch on, I know I've gotten some questions on Senate Bill 15, and so I'm kind of wrapping this up in just a recap on how the legislature has chosen to respond to the pandemic and the learning loss that was associated with that. And so you guys have seen this graph before. The commissioners presented similar data to legislators. We know that, there was a lot of lost instructional time, and that had real impact on kids and their academic performance, most notably in math. You can see the notable decline there from 19 to 21, that blue line, and reading dropped off a little bit as well. And then the other thing that the commissioner has been presenting to legislators is he's sort of broken. So we know overall there's been a decline, but one message that the agency has been communicating to lawmakers is that there's been more of a decline in districts that were so essentially the higher percent remote you were, right? The more of your kids that were attending remotely, generally speaking, the bigger declines we saw in STAR performance. And so this is pulled from the agency's report. You can see, so if your number of students that were attending in person was less than 25%, you saw the biggest declines in reading and math, and then it sort of walks down from there. And so again, I know this is the FAC meeting, but I just go over this to sort of set some context on why the legislature acted in the way that it did with the bills that were passed. So the two main responses were Senate Bill 15, right, the virtual education bill, and we've talked about that at previous FACs, but the main thing here is they didn't just open up the virtual education wide open for however districts saw fit because of the data that they saw on STAR performance, right? They did give a local remote learning option, but there are significant guardrails in place there, and so that's sort of motivated by some of that data they saw on this most recent STAR administration. And then of course, the other side of the coin there is for the kids that did fall behind. There was House Bill 4545 that was aimed at getting them caught back up, some additional resources there, and also some additional requirements on school districts there that are going to be cost drivers for your district. So first, I'm going to talk about Senate Bill 15. And we touched on this a little bit, so I'm just going to, these bullet points kind of go over some of the highlights there. The 10% limit, that 10% includes students that aren't just in the remote learning program, right? So if you guys do the remote conferencing or you have others methods of delivering instruction remotely, that would count, all of those remote students would count towards university camp, so not just the local remote learning program students. Of course, the bill does allow for sort of retroactive funding. So if you started the school year doing remote learning and it sort of meets the requirements under Senate Bill 15, then you that ADA will be recognized. The authorization to run these programs and get funding for these programs expires after the 22-23 school year. That was, I think, originally in House Bill 1468 in the first session. That was, or in the regular session, that was I think 2027, and then they scaled it way back because they are going to have a remote learning commission that's going to study the issue and make recommendations. I think I talked about that more in a second. Before I move on, we have prepared sort of a little guide to Senate Bill 15, and we sent this out. But if you are sort of scratching your head as I'm going over some of this, and you're not familiar with the details and how this may work and who can be funded under this, those details are here and so you can go review those. I did want to just quickly touch on the Virtual Education Commission because that's really, I think, what's going to guide so Senate Bill 15, I think, is just sort of a band-aid, just a bridge to help districts continue to be able to still provide remote learning during this period. But I think when we're talking about how remote learning will work in the state, long term, I think that will be based on the recommendations from this commission that was set up by House Bill 3643. And really the only thing I wanted to point out to y'all is, various different state leaders get to make appointees to this commission, right? So the governor has to include one teacher with greater than 10 years experience. Lieutenant governor and speaker have to include, they each have to include one school administrator or board member. So that's essentially 3 positions on this 13-member commission that are sort of required to have a public education background. And the other thing to be mindful of is, right, you don't see a requirement here that one member be from Region 1 or from the Valley, right? And so in terms of making sure that this commission reflects, the unique needs of Region 1, we need to, sort of be mindful of who's appointed this committee, and just keep an eye on their work once they get started and the recommendations that come out of this. But this is kind of the framework that's included in the bill. So those positions will get appointed, and that commission will need to develop recommendations, and that report will be due prior to the or December 31, 2022. All right, so then that's sort of the online learning angle of sort of the legislature's response. Kind of shifting gears over to House Bill 4545. You guys have had a little bit of time. We presented to the RAC on this, sort of the requirements under this bill. And so, as y'all know, any student that sort of fails to perform satisfactorily on the STAR in grades 3 through 8 or the EOC, you have to provide accelerated instruction to them. And so, just to clarify, failure to perform satisfactorily includes students that didn't take the STAR last year, right? Or students that failed the STAR last year. And so, for students that didn't take it last year, they can come in and take a beginning of year assessment. If they pass that, then they're not subject to the accelerated instruction requirements. But if they don't take that assessment or pass it, then they would, your district would need to provide accelerated instruction to them. And there's really 2 ways. Accelerated instruction really means 2 things. One, you assign that student to a teacher who has received a TIA designation. I know a lot of the districts in Region 1 are busy standing up those programs. And so that will make your compliance with House Bill 4545 much easier because you have that option to assign students to those teachers. To the extent you don't have that program, or you don't have enough TIA designated teachers for the remaining students that require accelerated instruction, you have to provide 30 hours of supplemental instruction. And there's all sorts of requirements on when you can provide the instruction, right? You can't pull them out of their foundation curriculum. You can't pull them out of the enrichment, the specials. You can't pull them out of recess. And so it's going to require, you guys being very mindful of carving out a time within the school day to help meet those requirements. And here's some other sort of requirements under the bill. Those tutoring groups, right? So you have, if a student's going to be receiving the 30 hours of supplemental instruction, it can't be in groups of more than 3 students unless a waiver is obtained. So you have to get, let's say you want to bump that up to 5, you have to get a waiver from each student for that. It has to be provided by a person with training in the applicable instructional materials, right? So it doesn't have to be a teacher, it doesn't have to be a certified teacher. It can be a volunteer, it can be a college student. Sorry, I'm coming to y'all live from Tassi, and the sun is really reflecting off this building next to me. So apologies for the glare there. So okay, yeah. So they don't have to be a certified teacher. They can be a volunteer. They can be a college student, but you do have to train them in the instruction materials. That is a requirement of the bill. So there will be a cost there for y'all. And then, as I mentioned, you can't remove them from sort of their core curriculum, their enrichment curriculum, or recess or physical activity. Okay, and so from a high level, we think that there's around 3.2 million tests that will trigger some sort of action under House Bill 4545. And so in that 3.2 million figure, that includes sort of our estimate. I mean, we know how many students failed to perform satisfactorily, so it includes that number. And then our sort of estimate of the number of students that didn't take it, that didn't take the STAR last year, but will and did not come back and pass a BOY assessment, right? And so we think that'll be around 3.2 million. There's, as of the end of last school year, there was only 4,600 teachers with TIA designations. So, you figure you put, a little bit more than 20 students, let's just say statewide, you put, all of the students you give to the TIA designated teachers require accelerated instruction, so you're loading up those classrooms. That's going to reduce the sort of number of tests that require accelerated instruction down to about 3 million. So statewide, districts are, on the hook to provide, 90 million hours of tutoring this school year. And so that's a heavy lift, and that's gonna drive some costs, some expenditures in your district. So make sure you guys are aware of those requirements, and you guys have a sense of the scale within your districts that's going to take. And so I just wanted to go, if you haven't heard anything about House Bill 4545, know that you need to start having those conversations within your district and get moving on that. The other thing I'd want to say is TEA has noted in their FAQ that in this first year of House Bill 4545, they're not going to be super rigorous with their check on compliance. Let's say, they still encourage everyone to comply as best as they can. But I think they recognize the position that districts across the state are in. And so I wouldn't expect the hammer to be brought down on districts this school year if you're not able to fully comply with the requirements under 4545. The other thing I want to mention with that is we had a bill that's during the second called special session that would have provided some relief these requirements, but it didn't pass, unfortunately. It would have limited the number that the test subjects that would have triggered the accelerated instruction requirements. It would have allowed y'all to increase the size of the tutoring groups from 3 to 4. So again, that's cutting on your tutoring costs. You could have temporarily increased it to 10 students, and also would have given you a big carrot, right? That last bullet point there. So all of your accelerated instruction students, if you brought up 60% of them to grade level on STAR, they passed the STAR, you would have been exempt essentially from the requirements under House Bill 4545. So that was a very popular provision in the bill. I don't believe it, it didn't make it over the finish line. I think it was more due to the time, this time ran out during the special session. I don't think there was real, at least not that was discussed during any meeting, any committee meetings or anything, any political opposition. So this could be potentially something that's added to the third special session call. And again, to the extent you guys want to start having conversations with your local elected officials, asking for relief, a little bit of relief or, flexibility under House Bill 4545, I think that would be at the top of the list, I think, for a lot of districts. And then you can point to House Bill 233 as an example of what that could look like. We also saw some additional tax relief passed during the special session. So we saw Senate Bill 8, which allows homeowners to get their exemption earlier, essentially not have to wait till January 1 of the following year. And then Senate Bill 12 would sort of ensure that the over 65 and disabled homeowners get a reduction in their bill due to the House Bill 3 compression. And so the important thing to note with both of these, well, I guess for Senate Bill 12, it has to be approved by the voters, right? So that's not that the implementation on that's going to be delayed a little bit because of that. But with both of these, they include state aid to offset the tax collection loss. And so that's that was, I don't believe either. Originally, I don't believe those bills included that provision, but due to the hard work of all of y'all's, advocacy groups here in Austin, they were able to get those provisions added. And so you'll see under other programs, you'll see that new state aid coming on once those bills are implemented. There's another bill that would provide even more compression that's being debated right now during the third special session, Senate Bill 1. It passed the Senate, and what it would do is similar to how they funded additional compression this current year, right? They funded that additional whatever it was 0.3% or drop that MCR down a little bit. They are this bill would essentially do the same thing, but at a bigger scale, right? So they're going to spend $2 to $4 billion to essentially bring that MCR down somewhere between 6 and 13 pennies. The problematic part of this is it's temporary. They will provide this compression for the 22-23 school year. And then presumably if they don't make another appropriation for this, rates would go back up after that year. And so the way this will look to your communities, right, in 22-23, everyone will get a tax rate reduction. And then the year after, if it expires and the legislature doesn't appropriate more money for that, it would feel to your taxpayers like a tax rate increase. And so that would obviously probably cause some resentment and some confusion in your communities and towards your board. And so that's something that could be problematic if this bill continues on in its current form, and then the legislature doesn't appropriate additional dollars after those funds are spent. The other part of this bill that's kind of confusing, I'm not really understanding what lawmakers are trying to accomplish here. There's a lot of hand wringing over, well, if the state comes in and does all this extra compression, the lawmakers are worried that now all these school districts are going to go out and increase their INS rate, pass additional bonds, and really eat into that compression, and then the taxpayers are left with not really feeling any property tax relief. And so they talked about this on the Senate floor. They had this really long conversation about it, and they were really focused on the INS rate as being something that would that would be the mechanism that school districts would use to offset this property tax compression, right? You guys under this bill, you'd see a compression on the M&O side, but then you'd increase your INS rate and offset it, and then the taxpayers wouldn't get any relief. Their lawmakers' attempt to correct this problem, though, doesn't, the provision they put in the bill doesn't address INS rate at all. All it really does is it prohibits districts from holding TREs in 22-23. And essentially it says that you can't adopt a rate that's higher than your voter approval tax rate. Well, your voter approval tax rate is just, it includes whatever INS rate you set that year. And so there's nothing in the voter approval tax rate that would limit or somehow apply downward pressure to the INS rate. And so all this would really mean is that you couldn't have a TRE. And then the other thing is, and we're working with some law firms and sort of picking their brain a little bit on this, but I know a lot of folks in Region 1 have adopted disaster pennies, right? Disaster pennies, could they really, those are pennies above your voter approval tax rate. So if this bill goes into effect with this provision, it could potentially prohibit the adoption of disaster pennies for 22-23. And that's really, the intent of this provision was focused on limiting the increase in INS rate, but it's drafted in such a way that it has all these other impacts that are not part of the discussion in sort of the development of this bill. And so I think that's, we're trying to explain some of this and help, work on some of that language, but as the way the bill works now, those would be the impacts. It also makes some changes to ballot language for future TREs. They pushed out I know some districts were worried if you were going for a TRE this year, they were worried that, well, you're changing the ballot language and it's sort of in the middle of the game and I'm not able to do that. They pushed the implementation date out, and so this would not apply, the ballot language change would not apply to folks going out for a TRE right now. Just out of curiosity, if anyone is going for a TRE, I'm just kind of curious. If you wouldn't mind just dropping it in the chat, I'd like to. I know a lot of folks in Region 1 are doing disaster pennies, but I am curious to know if anyone is going for a TRE. Okay. I'm going to look at the chat. I don't see any other questions. I'm going to keep on trucking here. Oh, and that's actually it for me. So I'm happy to, if you guys do have any questions, feel free to come off mute or leave something in the chat. But that's what I know today. Thanks for having me. Romalda, you out there?
Yes,
There
thank
she-
you, Josh. Thank you. Do we have any questions for Josh from the group? We can do a survey, Josh, on anyone that may consider, that may be considering TREs.
Mhm. Okay, yeah, that'd be great.
So Josh, so I did put a comment here. So they don't want you to do TREs because they don't want the taxpayer to have an increase, right?
Correct, yeah.
And
Though, the thing that, the reason I kind of camped out on that for so long is that's not when you, during the committee hearing and on the Senate floor, as they're kind of debating the bill, there's been no, they don't bring up TREs as a concern. They put this provision in there to try and control INS increases. And so it's just curious that they either, they're not understanding what the voter approval tax rate means, or they are, or they're just trying to, I guess, control what they can. But essentially what that provision would do, exactly what you said, is just prevent you guys to increase your tax rate through a TRE.
okay. And I guess for IFA purposes, every year we have to go through the calculation to calculate the adequate INS tax rate so that we can receive our entitlement through IFA, and then to ensure that we're gonna be able to collect sufficient taxes to maximize on that allocation. But all of us are experiencing declines in ADA. So because 88 is a component of the formula, INS will increase. So that's why I put my comment in there. I understand the concept of TREs, but that only if the legislature is really looking at not increasing, then I don't know how that can be done when most districts are experiencing declines in ADA.
Yeah, so I think part of the problem is they can't really control your INS rate, right? Because if they tried to prevent you from increasing your rate, I think the bond market would freak out. It's an right. It's all your bonds, right? They're unlimited tax bonds, right? And that means that you levy a rate, right, to service your debt. And so I think that I think that's as part of it, is that they can't really act in that way. They're gonna give speeches on the Senate floor about it, but in terms of what provisions are actually able to put in statute, I think that's essentially where they landed. It's just that, well, we can't control the INS side, so let's just put a pause on TREs for a year.